So it's been 3 weeks since I've been up here, and if you're part of our church text group, you understand why. Easter is exhausting as far as ministry goes. There's a lot of things that go into it. There's a lot of work, a lot of behind the scenes that go into it, and I'm not the only one. I realize that I'm a very small piece in this puzzle. But the other reason, and so I went to the leadership, um, I think right at the end of March, and I said, "Hey, listen, if you guys are okay with it, with your permission, I would after Easter, I want to take 3 Sundays off in a row. But I plan on being here. Like I'm not going anywhere. Like we're gonna go on vacation." And then I told Cody, I was like, it's okay with you. I'm gonna take time and not be on the stage with the worship team. And I broke my own rule last week because I wanted to play with Roy. I wanted to make sure I was up there when we played with Roy, so that was important. But I took some time out in front, and I did something that I don't get to do very often. I got to sit with my wife and my kids during church. Pretty cool. I never get to do that, really. I realize that my kids, I love them, but sometimes they're the loud ones in the back, and that's okay. They're still learning. But I got to sit with them and hopefully model for them what it is to engage in praise and worship. And we had some bigger conversations about that. Why we shouldn't talk when we're singing, right? Because it's disruptive to people and it's also not focused on God. We get to talk about why it's important that I think you should stand when we're worshiping because we're standing in the presence of the Almighty God. Not everyone does it, but we talk about why we raise our hands and we're surrendering to Him, and this is a sign of that surrender. Then I got to sit with my wife. We got to listen to the message together, and it's kind of neat. Because the first Sunday that I didn't get up here, we talked about Mission Sunday, and so I got to sit back and just kinda look at all the mission work we've been doing and the Magi boxes and, going down to the Dominican, and we're supporting a mission in Zimbabwe now and the Christian Center and, um, Judy Lopez down in Mexico. And I don't wanna take away from any of that, but my favorite part of our Mission Sunday was Stacy. You guys know Dan and Stacy. Um, I always miss them when they're not here because they sit right here. This is like they're like my anchor people, man. Like I know they're there. And she talked a little bit about what the church has done in her life. And I don't know if you know this, but when I first came here, they were one of the first people, one of the first families that I baptized. And one of my favorite things that I've done is they were baptized, and then we went to their house, and I married them on their porch the same day. I've never done that ever before in my life. But they were so committed to trying to get their life right with God. They wanted to do it right, so they gave their life to Jesus, they got baptized, and then they came together, a union, and got married on the same day. And I love it because I've got to see them grow and watch them how they serve and have incredible conversations. And listen, and I say this lovingly, and she would agree with me, they're not perfect. They're still trying to figure it out. So am I. Right? But we got to hear a little bit, and why I think that's important is because so often when we talk about missions, we look overseas and we fail to realize the biggest mission is oftentimes right outside our doors. Because I don't know what's gonna happen with these kids. I've been to Africa. I saw the work they're doing, but I'm not there. But every day I get to interact with Dan and Stacy and Charlie and Zane and try to help them navigate. We get to do that, right? That's why this is so important. And then we get to Jesse the following Sunday preaching. And listen, I love that kid, man. And I already told him this someday he's going to surpass me, and I know it. And I hope that he does. I hope that we disciple him well enough that God gives him bigger audiences and bigger opportunities than I ever had. And the day that he leaves here, and I'm not saying it's gonna happen anytime soon, I could be completely wrong, but if God ever takes him from this place, I hope we celebrate with him. And my favorite part about Jesse is he met Lydia, and Lydia's fantastic. I like Jesse. Lydia's cooler, all right? Just saying. But I got to we get to see in how he's growing in his faith, and he's studying the word of God, and one of the things that he said that stuck with me is he's like, "You can you can be following Jesus and still be a work in progress." And if that's not the truth, I loved it. And then Mark from Camp Elkhorn Valley is another one of our missions we support. Mark came in pretty heavy last week, and I think rightfully so, because he said everything we have belongs to God anyways, and we should live like that. It's not mine to give to him. It's his that he's given to me, and all I'm doing is giving it back. And he's talking about finances and time and resources. And I know everyone hates talking about money, but I think what Mark said was powerful. I walked out of here thinking, what more could I do with my life? And so over the last couple of weeks, I've been spending a lot of time just in prayer. I've been spending a lot of time with my family. I've been spending a lot of time just sitting around plucking on my guitar, doing some things that are fun. But the whole focus has been, God, what are you showing me? I've been here 4 years, which is crazy to think about. When we came here, Miles was just crawling, and now he's trying to jump out the window of our house. Like, when we came here, Everett was 6. And in 4 years' time, this church we've gone through a lot of changes. Gone through a name change. We've changed the way our worship style has shifted. I preach on the floor. I've stood in a pulpit and I've said some things that I thought were profound, and I've said some things that I thought were completely stupid. I've made mistakes. I've struggled to get things right. On the other side, I see families that have come to know Jesus a lot of times just from a willingness to just be Christ. I've seen God give me an opportunity to stand in places, to stand in gaps that I never thought I would have. We've become a church that's known in this community. Oftentimes when there's events going on around here, we're the first church people call because we're building a rapport. People know us. They know that we love them. We continue to add the blessing box, and the brown bag diner downstairs continues to feed people in this community. We continue to do outreach by our best guests, and it's not about numbers, but our Easter egg hunt this year had 375 people, which means that the community recognizes us as a place that's safe for their kids, family friendly. We just added a toddler room, which I'm really excited about. So this is kind of that in between phase. I'm working with Jesse. For those who are in junior and senior high, you're going to have your own space downstairs here in the near future. We're giving you a whole room to do whatever you want with, as long as you don't paint it like completely black, maybe a dark gray. But we want to build our relationships with this community. We've seen 37 people in 4 years give their life to Christ. That's what we want to do. And yet I can't help but feel this is just the beginning. And so that's what I've been wrestling with the last couple of weeks is, God, what do we do next? How do I lead better? You know, sometimes in ministry it's easy to assume that all of this rises and falls on me. I think that's the biggest mistake that I make in my life is I assume that the success and failure of this church is somehow tied to me. And you know what God showed me in these last 3 weeks? told me to get over myself. By the way, not the message I was expecting to hear. I was hoping for a more encouraging word from the Lord. But he reminded me that it's not about me. Instead, it's always been about him. And so that's where we find ourselves this morning. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning of Genesis chapter 11. So Genesis chapter 11, we kind of go through a family breakdown, a generational breakdown coming from Shem, who eventually has a descendant known as Abram. And Abram, if you know, would eventually become Abraham, but he's from a descendant of the line of Shem, right? And so he has a lineage of faith and big things. And so all of chapter 11 is just laying out this account of how we get to Abram. And then you jump right over to chapter 12, and it says, verse 1 says, the Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land that I will show you. God says, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And so what does Abram do? He goes to God and says, hey, listen, cool. What's the plan? Where am I going? How many people am I taking with me? What am I going to do when I get there? No, that's not what he does. He literally, verse 4, it says, so Abram left as the Lord had told him. So God shows up to Abram and says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless the nations because of you. I'm going to take care of you. Those who bless you, I'm going to bless. Those who curse you, I'm going to curse. And Abram's response is to get up, leave his father's house, leave everything that he knows, leave everything behind him. And he walks out the door and says, God, let's go. What kind of a faith is that? I mean, he literally had nothing, no game plan. I can't even go to the store without making a list for groceries. I'm just being honest. Like, every time I have an opportunity in my life and people come to me, like, the first thing I have to do is I have to sit down and I have to analyze. Okay, what's this gonna cost me? What do I have to do? How much time and energy can I do this right now? God goes to Abram with nothing other than a promise and says, go, I will go with you. What kind of faith is that? So Abram takes what he has and he leaves with Lot. And he goes and he starts this journey with God. He finds himself in Egypt. If you go down through chapter 12, it says, now there was a famine in the land, starting in verse 10, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. And as he was about to enter into Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know you're a beautiful woman. You are. It's a good man right there, calling his wife beautiful. It says, when the Egyptians when they see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say that you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake. My life will be spared because of you. So he goes to Egypt. He realizes that his wife is pretty good looking. Realizes they find out that this is his wife, they're going to kill him. And so what does he do? He lies, sort of. He says, listen, don't tell them you're my wife. Keep that to yourself. But if they think you're my sister, they're gonna have favor with you, they're gonna have favor with me. So that's what he does. Ends up taking his wife, and they go, and they eventually take his wife, because she's pretty. The Egyptians add her to Pharaoh's, like, harem. But it's interesting to me because what I kinda love about this story is if I'm Abram and I'm in his situation, I completely understand where he's coming. Because how many times have I walked into something that God told me to do, and I get into the middle of it, and I'm like, "Well, what if what if God doesn't show up? What if God doesn't protect me from these men because they think that she's my wife? You know what? I think I'm gonna, all right, God, this is good. I like this, but I'm gonna step over here and I'm gonna shift a little bit and God, you're still here, but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take a little bit of charge. All right, God, I'm gonna do it this way." So what happens? He's safe for a while. They end up finding out. Eventually, God actually spares Pharaoh from doing anything stupid. They find out that that's actually his wife, not his sister. Of course, this enrages them because they're thinking, "Why would you put us in a situation?" I think it's interesting. It's notable to me that even though I don't really consider the Egyptians to have much of morality, they find out that this is his wife, and they're like, "Whoa, you almost made us do something bad." And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I love it because in their mind, Pharaoh's like, even has enough common sense that I should not be doing this. So they kind of get kicked out and they move on, and Abram and Lot go their separate ways. And Lot gets into trouble, chapter 14, and Abram comes along and protects him. And then we get to chapter 15, and this is what I love. Again, Abram has not done great things. He's been obedient, but in his obedience, he's wavered a little bit because he's still trying to figure out how to do things on his own. So 15, it says, after this, verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. He said, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I'm your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus." And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Abram says, "God, you've protected us thus far, but you haven't given me a son. Everything I have is going to go to who? A servant?" Then the word of the Lord came to him and said, "This man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited him as righteousness. So Abram's belief in this moment was credited. This was credited to him as righteousness. He trusted God. He also said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land and take possession of it." But Abram said, "O sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" I just want to be like, because God just told you. But he says, "God, I don't quite understand. How will I know?" So the Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." Abram brought all these things out to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. By the way, can we talk about how grateful I am that we don't do animal sacrifices anymore? Spread everything out. They put the birds of prey came down, the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. And as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. And I can imagine Abram's thinking, but you just said this is all mine. And now you're telling me things are going to happen that are not good for us. And then God said, but I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. Fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. So Abram comes to God and says, God, I want to trust you, but I have some questions. And then in chapter 16, they're so desperate to have a son that Sarai at the time, gives her husband to her house servant. Because if Sarai can't have a son, maybe this servant, we have Ishmael, comes out of this. But again, Abram he's trying his best to live up. He's trying to be faithful. He's trying to be obedient, and he keeps trying to do it on his own. And God has shown him, he's reminded him. He continues to be with him and protect him. And chapter 17 talks about the covenant of circumcision, and this is how God sets them apart. We get to chapter 18, and we're starting to get to Sodom and Gomorrah, and you just see life continue to happen for Abram. At some point, his name gets changed to Abraham, which is fantastic. His wife becomes Sarah. This is what God has done. He's transforming them. But all of this started because of a simple act of obedience and faith. And then we get chapter 21, Genesis, and it says, now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. And at the very time God had promised him, Abraham gave him the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore to him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God has commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old. 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. 100 years old. I can't even keep up with my kids when I was 25. 100 years old. And eventually, if you continue to read through 21, Hagar and Ishmael were sent away, which again, God used this. But all of this started because when God told Abraham to go, he went. He didn't try to reason with him. He didn't try to argue with him. And we see throughout his life in Genesis that he continues to find God everywhere that he is. Even when he does the dumb things, lied about his wife, God protected him in the situation. He ended up having a child with his house servant, and God ended up using Hagar and Ishmael and would do great things with them. But even though Abram, who's now Abraham, kept trying to intervene in what God was doing, God kept showing up and consistently fulfilling his promise to him. At 100 years old, he sees his son. For the first time, he holds his son at 100 years old. But it doesn't stop there. In chapter 22, verse 1, it says, sometime later, God tested Abraham. And he said to him, Abraham, and he replied, here I am. And God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. And then God says something that's absolutely crazy to me. He says, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering as one of the mountains I will tell you about. God says, take your only son and sacrifice him. And I can we be honest that that's hard sometimes, the process, right? We read that and think, what in the world is happening here? Why, why would God do such a thing? But it bookends. Chapter 12, Abraham hears God and God says, go, and he leaves. And then you see throughout the next, 11 chapters, that every time God tells Abraham something, he kind of questions it or it kind of does something and adds a little bit to it. But you get to chapter 22, God says, take your son and go sacrifice him. And Abraham's response is, early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. And on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and he placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up to his father Abraham and said, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied, the fire and the wood are here. But Isaac said, where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. So Abraham he's at this place in his life where he has seen God do enough incredible things that God says, sacrifice your only son. And Abraham's response is, okay, God, I trust you with this. What kind of faith is that? As they walk along and Abraham and Isaac are talking, and Isaac says to his dad, Dad, where's the lamb? And like every great father, Abraham uses this moment to teach Isaac the greatest lesson he's ever going to learn. He said, son, God will provide. Knowing full well in his head what God has asked him to do, but he says to Isaac, don't worry. God will take care of it. What kind of faith do you have to walk to a mountain ready to sacrifice your son to say, God, I know you're going to take care of this. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it, and he bound his son Isaac and he laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and he took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy. He said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. Abraham looked up there and in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns, and he went over and he took the ram and he sacrificed as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. To this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it'll be provided. So the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time, and he said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed Beersheba. What kind of faith do you have? Must you have to stand at an altar ready to sacrifice your son because God has called you to do it? And listen, I realize how crazy this sounds, and especially when I'm talking to people who don't go to church, and they're like, "Well, God's crazy." God's not crazy because God knew what was going to happen all along. See, that's the difference in this story. As Abraham is really, he's functioning from this place of limited knowledge. He doesn't know what the next step is. He doesn't know what God has planned. He doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But through the course of his life, his faith has led him to the place where no matter what God asks of him, his response is, "Yes, Lord." Not because he has it all figured out, not because there's a plan in place, not because he sat down and did all the math, but because he knows and he has seen God continue to show up in his life day after day after day and consistently rescue him, consistently fulfill his promise, consistently be God. What kind of faith is that? To stand in an altar and say, "God, I will give you my son simply because I know, God, I know you provide." What kind of faith is that? Came here 4 years ago. I still don't have the plan. God still hasn't had a meeting with me and told me what the next 5 years is gonna look like. But that's the point. This kind of faith isn't developed in knowing the outcome. This kind of faith only comes from knowing who God is, knowing how consistent and loving and compassionate and caring He is. And it's so much more than this moment of sacrifice. When we go to the doctors and we get a diagnosis that we don't know the outcome, this kind of faith says, "God, I know you're gonna take care of it." This kind of faith allows us to look at our bank account when we don't have a dollar to spend, you're living paycheck to paycheck, and say to God, "I know that you will provide for me. I trust you with this." This kind of faith moves mountains. This kind of faith is how the church started. This kind of faith is what's gonna change this community. This kind of faith is what set addicts free when they're struggling and their marriages are falling apart and they're battling addiction, and they get up every day and they say, "God, I know you can do this because I know who you are." It's not me. It's not about me. It's not about what I can do. It's not about how well I lead. None of this depends on me. None of this depends on you, because even in our failures, God is still God. Abraham battled with it. He messed up. He did stupid things. He said the wrong thing. And God still proved himself faithful because that's who God is. What kind of faith does it take to trust that every day of my life, God is in control? To not worry about tomorrow. God never told Abraham the outcome. All he did was ask Abraham to be faithful and obedient. When I say go, you go. When I say build, you build. When I say you have a conversation with someone you had never talked before in your life, trust me. When I tell you that, you just came from the doctors and you just find out that you have this stage 4 cancer, I need you to trust me with it. Trust me, not for what you want, but trust that the outcome I have for you is what I am going to do, and then I'm going to be faithful to you and I will take care of you. I will provide for you. I will give you what you need. When we talked about last week, and Mark says, we talk about giving and offering and tithing, and that's such a difficult thing because, listen, I live in the same world that you do. I live in the same place where gas is $5 a gallon, where groceries continue to creep up, where the money around us continues. That I feel like the dollar is worth nothing. I live in the same world that you do, and yet God continues to ask us to give of our time and our energy and our resources, not because he needs them, but because he needs us to trust him with them. I will tell you this, and I'm not bragging. I have never given more of my time, energy, and tithe to the church and had God fail me on the other side of it. Never once. Never. 40 years I've lived in this world, and I have never been lacking for anything. I have never spent more time in scripture and came out worse than when I went in. I've never spent more time with my kids and my wife and trying to build a solid Christian family and came out worse on the other side. I've never given more time and energy to evangelizing the lost and somehow became a worse person. That's not how this works. Everything that I give to God, he has given back to me oftentimes tenfold over. Because that is who he is. All he asks is for faithfulness and obedience. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know where you're struggling. Maybe it's addiction. Maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's you're going through grief. Maybe you're broken. Maybe you're the overdraft fees on your account are more than what's in your bank every month. Maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe you have an abundance. I don't know. I don't know what you're going through. But I know the God that you serve is faithful. The God that you have committed your life to, the God who is willing to die on a cross for you, is faithful to keep his promises. There was 2 things that came out of the last 3 weeks. One, God told me to get over myself, which is fair. But the bigger thing that came out of those last 3 weeks was God said, "Trust me more." Because when I get over myself, when I stop thinking it's because of me, when I stop relying on my talents and my resources and my abilities, the only place I can go is to him. The God who was faithful to Abram is the same God who's faithful to us. And it's not because we know everything. I don't think I'd want. I'm pretty much convinced that if I knew the whole plan, I would screw it up. I guarantee it. God's not calling us to follow a plan. He's calling us to follow him. So when he calls, may our response always be, "Here I am, Lord.